Is a regional war brewing in the Middle East? Hours before recording this segment, Israel confirmed that its forces killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. This comes on the heels of Israel's recent killings of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran and of Hassan Nasrallah, the head of the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. In response, Iran retaliated by launching nearly 200 ballistic missiles at Israeli military sites. Now, as Israel threatens to bomb Iran, the region faces the looming possibility of a full-scale war, one that could draw in multiple neighboring countries. Joining me to discuss all of this is Assal Rad, historian and author of State of Resistance, Politics, Culture, and Identity in Modern Iran, and As'ad Abukhalil, professor of political science at California State University, Stanislaus. I want to thank you both for joining me. Assal, as of this recording, there is an imminent threat of an Israeli strike on Iran. Iran's foreign minister has warned Israel against attacking its infrastructure. He said, if any attack against our country takes place, our response will be more powerful. Now, Israel has said they'll focus their attack on military targets in Iran and will avoid nuclear enrichment sites, that they will avoid oil sites. Do you believe, first of all, that Israel's going to launch a large-scale attack? And also, what does a more powerful response from Iran look like?
Well, first, the idea that Israel has agreed to avoid oil facilities and nuclear facilities is something that was reported in just this week in different U.S. outlets. But the prime minister, the official handle of the prime minister's office, gave a statement saying that they'll listen to U.S. opinions, but ultimately they'll make decisions based on their own national interests. So in my view, that sort of leaves the door open for we still don't really know what kind of attack we're going to get from the Israeli side. Now, another part in the way that it's framed is it makes it seem as if Israel is responding to an Iranian attack, and often in the Western perspective, in terms of the political discourse, it leaves out the fact that, in fact, Iran was responding to an Israeli attack, and now we're looking at a retaliation of a retaliation. Israel expanded the war into Lebanon, invaded Lebanon, bombed its cities, flattened residential buildings, have killed more than 2,000 people, and assassinated Hassan Nasrallah. And the problem with this kind of tactic by Israel to just carry out assassinations is something that they have used even in non-military situations. For instance, Israel has carried out over a decade of assassinations of Iranian scientists in Iran in order to prevent Iran's nuclear program from expanding. But you can't eradicate knowledge. You can't eradicate ideas. And you certainly cannot eradicate an idea through violence that was born of that very violence. And that's why that history is so important, to understand where did Hezbollah come from? Where did Hamas come from? They are reactions to occupation and violence that has been imposed by Israel for decades. And that the resistance to that is the idea that can't be eradicated.
Let's talk about U.S. Involvement. U.S. munitions are being used by Israel in both Gaza and Lebanon right now. The U.S. is also deploying 100 American troops to help bolster Israel's air defenses. If Israel drags the U.S., let's just say this happens, if the U.S. gets dragged into a war against Iran by Israel, some have suggested that Iran would attack U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf or could also strike oil infrastructure belonging to U.S. allies in the region, leading to a potential full-scale regional war, not to mention a global economic collapse. What is the U.S.'s risk calculation here? Assal, I'll start with you and then go to As'ad.
I'm honestly having a difficult time understanding the risk assessment, right? Because in reality, there are unforeseeable consequences to any kind of conflict or war. And in this particular situation, you have endless possibilities. When people, it's not just alarmist to say something like World War III, because the reality is that those potentials exist. You're talking about if Israel chooses to carry out an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, this can trigger Iran leaving the non-proliferation treaty, deciding to weaponize its program, and then trigger an arms race within the region. Now you're increasing the threat of nuclear war, which becomes a global threat. So in terms of a risk assessment, it's very difficult to understand the logic of the Biden administration, when in fact it has enormous leverage over Israel to bring about a ceasefire that it's chosen not to use.
Asad, on that point, calculating the risk assessment is one thing. Like, what's the message here? Like, what does it signal that the U.S. is sending troops to Israel?
the dispatch of U.S. troops to the region undermines the historical argument of the Israeli lobby. I mean, the Israeli lobby and its advocates have been saying for many years and decades that the United States need to invest all these billions of dollars and send all these advanced weapons into Israel because Israel can take care of itself by itself without having the United States to intervene. We discovered from this episode, this year of wars, is that Israel can't even defend itself against non-armies, small organizations, relatively speaking, like Hamas and Hezbollah. It requires the intervention of the military of the US, of Germany, of France and Britain, and of several Arab governments. So that tells you this is a state that has been a bad investment for the United States. And the Biden administration is taking two regions to the brink of nuclear war in the Middle East, as well as Russia and the Ukraine, which is not our subject. But there are no consideration of the long term. I mean, look what's happening in Lebanon and Palestine. You are creating generation of revenge. You have absolutely the certitude that within years and many years to come, there will be people who will take acts of revenge against Israel and support in the West. And when that happens, you have all these Western liberals, exclaiming in innocence, why do they hate us? Why are they doing these attacks? Well, it is because of the carnage that's been going on in the genocide for over a year. There will be repercussions. 1982 produced Hezbollah. The crushing of the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza produced Hamas. And there will be new movements that will continue to emerge. And Hamas and Hezbollah are not dead. They are far from being dead, despite the eradication or the elimination of some of their commanders. They will continue by virtue of the logic of brutal occupation.
In a video message, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged the Lebanese people to join Israel in rising up against Hezbollah or risk facing the same fate as Gaza. Take a look.
You have an opportunity to save Lebanon before it falls into the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza. It doesn't have to be that way. I say to you, the people of Lebanon, free your country from Hezbollah so that this war can end. Free your country from Hezbollah so that your country could prosper again.
In addition to that, former Prime Minister and current Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid proposed creating a foreign-trained force in Lebanon named the South Lebanon Army and urged Lebanese citizens to join it in order to help dismantle their government. What it sounds like to some, myself included, is that Netanyahu is trying to incite a civil war. Am I overstating things, As'ad?
Not at all, Mark, not at all. In fact, he gave the Lebanese people a choice, either genocide or a civil war. He also basically is telling the Lebanese people, look, I can't take on Hezbollah. I cannot defeat Hezbollah. I want you to defeat Hezbollah for me. As far as Lapid, what he's suggesting, the South Lebanon army was tried. It terrorized the population. It was notorious for torture, murders, rapes of the population of South Lebanon. And what happened to them? In 2000, when the brave people of South Lebanon liberated their land from Israeli occupation, they fled for their life across the border. The leader of the South Lebanon army wound up opening a Lebanese restaurant selling falafel and hummus in occupied Palestine.
So that, because one of the things that's most obvious and glaring in that message is that it's in English, right? So from the very beginning, his message to the Lebanese people is being stated in English. And that's because it's not really a message to the Lebanese people. It's a message to a Western audience. He's showing his threat, essentially, to the world. Either Hezbollah is going to be eradicated through the actions of the Lebanese people, or we will destroy the Lebanese people. That's basically the options that he's giving.
But to what end? I mean, what's the end game for Israel with that logic? Hezbollah has been attacking Israel with rockets for the last year, displacing 60,000 Israeli civilians. And Israel says their end goal is just to neutralize the Hezbollah threat. But hearing Netanyahu talk and hearing Lapid talk and hearing them discuss Lebanon's future, it seems like they want a lot more than that. It seems like they want to stop Hezbollah, perhaps, but they also want a regime change completely. Or is this the first step in expanding Jerusalem to Damascus, as Israeli Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich put it?
I think the end goal is to degrade the power of any of the resistance movements that exist within the region that can resist Israeli power, especially where they have military strength that can sustain their own borders. Because to your point, yes, expansion is certainly part of the project. I mean, that has been part of the Zionist project from the beginning. And when you look at something as simple as the way that Netanyahu presents maps of Israel to the United Nations with a complete erasure of Gaza and the West Bank, as if there is no Palestine or Palestinian territory that exists, this notion of conquest, that it would somehow stop at the borders of Palestine, is absurd. You can see it in the history of Israel and its occupation currently in Syria. It's not only occupying Palestinian territory. It has in the past occupied Lebanon as well. So it wants to degrade any capability of any of these states to be able to resist its conquest.
As'ad, I'll give you the last word on this.
Well, I mean, we should remember that in the last year alone, Israel has been bombing the following countries: Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Iran. And they even plan to even go after more powers. I mean, in my lifetime, they attacked so many other countries in the region. That's the history of Israel. They think by more violence, we can subjugate them, but they will not be subjugated. The Zionist project is doomed for that reason.
Assal Rad, As'ad Abukhalil, thank you both so much for joining me on UpFront. All right, that is our show. UpFront, we'll be back next week.